Hey everybody, this is Dr. Hathcock here for the second part of the New Deal topic. Let's just jump right on into this and look at letter M here with opposition to the New Deal. To this point, we've covered quite a bit of ground, talked about a lot of programs, and a lot of the stuff that we've looked at to this point was passed in like the first 3 or so months of FDR's administration. We look at all that and we refer to it as the first 100 days. It's a bevy of activity, unlike anything the government had seen at that point. So many programs, so much spending. And so, yeah, the first new days of the New Deal just kind of shows you like what it's aimed at. Trying to get the country back up on its feet, a willingness to spend money to create job programs and things like that. This whole first 100 days period is also referred to as the first New Deal. And the first New Deal really was aimed at trying to help the institutions. We've looked at bank reform with things like Glass-Steagall. We've looked at stock market reform with the Securities Exchange Act and the Securities Exchange Commission. And then we looked at a lot of programs that were aimed at trying to help revitalize and recover the economy. So, yeah, that first 100 deals, we always say it kind of is aimed at the institutions. Here in a little bit, we'll look at the second New Deal. And the second New Deal really was more about trying to help people live their everyday lives. Okay, but there was some opposition that began to mount to this New Deal. I'm going to look here at Republicans, American Liberty League, Father Coughlin, Dr. Townsend, and Huey Long. And as I look at each one, I'll give you FDR's response to that opposition. And some of that response to to the opposition, it has a big effect on things to come. Okay, well, let's look at Republicans and what Republicans opposed about the New Deal. I've always told students this: it's politics. I mean, if this was a Republican president doing this, the Democrats would oppose it. This is a Democratic president doing this, so Republicans are going to oppose it. So a lot of this is just simply politics. You're the opposition party; you're supposed to oppose. But Republicans did bring up that, hey, this is a lot of spending. This is big government. Our great great grandkids will probably end up having to pay this thing off on down the road. So, Republican opposition, it's not that far-fetched or crazy. It was a lot of programs, it was a lot of spending. But Roosevelt's response to them was to say, hey, look, drastic times call for drastic measures. We got to do something to kickstart and revitalize this country. He also said things like, hey, Hoover's way of doing things didn't work. The American people elected me because they wanted a different take on things, a different way of approach, if you will, of reform. So yeah, his response to Republicans was just simply to say that, got to do something to get this country going again. The American Liberty League was a group of conservative businessmen. It was actually founded by the DuPont family. They're still around in today's world, heavily involved in chemicals and paints and things like that. And the American Liberty League, like the Republicans, it took a strong opposition to the New Deal as well. The American Liberty League had a slogan, "We're all in," ALL-in, we're all in. They would oppose the New Deal through the radio, programs on the radio, through the newspapers, magazines. They paid people to go out and sort of talk, speak publicly against the New Deal. And Roosevelt's response to the American Liberty League was really the same what he gave Republicans. It's drastic times. The country has to get revitalized. We have to have these programs. So really, it's the same kind of response to both of those. But his response to Father Coughlin, Dr. Townsend, and Huey Long, those really are things that are going to bring about some stuff happening on down the road. So let's jump on into Father Coughlin here. Here on the bottom left of your slide, you can see that's Doctor. It's Father Charles Coughlin. He was a Catholic priest, but he was also a big radio personality of the 1930s. He reached hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of Americans who would tune in to listen to Father Coughlin on the radio. He was a bit of a celebrity for his time, if you will. His radio program was mainly about religion, a lot about trying to live a good life, but he would stray into politics a lot. And in 1932, Father Coughlin endorsed Franklin Roosevelt for president, told his listening audience that they too should vote for Franklin Roosevelt. So, yeah, this is a guy who supports the president. He's the kind of guy who can reach a large audience, so you want to pay attention to him and address his concerns. And Father Coughlin's concern really was that the New Deal wasn't doing enough for just everyday Americans. He's watching that first 100 days and he says, look, I see the banks, the stock market, these things are getting a lot of attention. But what about the people? And Father Coughlin said there wasn't enough being done to help people, those who were unemployed, homeless, things like that. FDR's response to Father Coughlin was to say, I agree with you. We're going to start doing more for people. It's only been 100 days, right? You can only do so much in a short period of time. But FDR's response to Father Coughlin really is the second New Deal. It really is programs that are going to be aimed at trying to help get people working back up on their feet, things like that. So, yeah, FDR's response to Father Coughlin will in part lead to the New Deal. I'm sorry, the second New Deal coming about. Just a little more on Father Coughlin. It's kind of a tragically strange and sad story. He just really got eaten up with a lot of conspiracy theories. Father Coughlin was anti-Semitic. That came through on his radio program, that he said things that were critical of Jewish people. He started, sort of talking Nazi talking points at times, especially with regards to, Jewish people. He also had this strange conspiracy theory in his mind that he came to believe that President Roosevelt was working with Jewish bankers to take over the country. Started calling the New Deal the Jew deal and just, really hate mongering things like that. Roosevelt kind of played a game with this guy to a point. Like, you need those votes, you need him saying good things about you on the radio. But, at some point, Father Coughlin's star didn't shine quite as much. People started to really see him, for what he was doing, being a hate monger, going down these sort of conspiracy theory roads and things like that. All right, let's look at Dr. Townsend now, Dr. Francis Townsend. He's going to be on the bottom right-hand side of your slide here. Dr. Townsend, as you can see, is an older gentleman here in the 1930s. And Dr. Townsend's big concern was there wasn't enough being done for the elderly in our country. He felt like more needed to be done for retirees and the elderly here during the Depression. Dr. Townsend was a retired doctor from California. He just, in so many ways, he spoke for the elderly in America and retirees at that moment in time. And Dr. Townsend was dead on accurate and correct. There wasn't enough being done for the elderly in the country. There were so many older Americans being pushed to the side during the Depression. And Roosevelt's response to Dr. Townsend was to say, I agree with you. More does need to be done for the elderly. That response to Dr. Townsend will lead to Social Security coming about later on down the road as well. Dr. Townsend had this idea he called the Townsend Plan, whereby the government would send retirees like a monthly check, if you will, that they could use that check for their medicines, their medical concerns, or whatever really they wanted to do. It was kind of a strange part of that Townsend Plan was they had to spend the money. Like they had to spend the entire $250 to get their next month's check. So Roosevelt agrees with the premise of the Townsend Plan. And that Townsend Plan is the blueprint, in a way. It's the precursor to what becomes Social Security later on down the road. Okay, last but not least, there is Huey Long. Huey Long is a big political figure coming out of Louisiana. Was a governor of the state of Louisiana, was a senator from the state of Louisiana. And Huey Long down in Louisiana had set up a program that he called Share Our Wealth. And under Share Our Wealth, what he did is he taxed corporations, businesses, and rich people in Louisiana at very high rates, and then used that money to, do various social programs in the state of Louisiana. Like he would really tax the rich to pay for roads, hospitals, textbooks in schools, So it was kind of like taxing the rich, and then in some way or shape or form, using that money to help pay for the rest of the state. Uh, I don't know. Critics of share of wealth called it Robin Hood, that he was taxing the rich to pay to the poor. But it is income redistribution. That's always been sort of a catchy idea throughout American history, to just tax the rich to help pay for everything. Um, it can work to an extent, but you can also overtax. You might tax to the point where corporations and companies just leave because they don't want to pay those taxes anymore. And so, yeah, Huey Long was doing that in Louisiana. And FDR's response to Huey Long was to say, we do need to do something about deficit spending. We do need to kind of rein all that in. But he wasn't going to tax people at the same rates that Huey Long was taxing them. So the Revenue Act that'll get passed in 1935, that we'll talk about here in a bit, that's like a direct response to Huey Long and his criticism of the New Deal. All right, so to put all this together one more time, the New Deal, it's a lot of programs, a lot of spending. It's happening fast. First New Deal is about helping the institutions. Republicans and American Liberty League are opposing this on conservative grounds. It's too much. Big government, a lot of spending. But then Father Coughlin's problem is not enough's being done for people directly. FDR's response is the second New Deal. Dr. Townsend's opposition is not enough is being done for the elderly and retirees. FDR's response will be Social Security. And Huey Long says you need to tax the rich to help pay for these programs. And FDR's response to that will be the Revenue Act of 1935. All right, so now getting into that second New Deal, I think you really got to kick that conversation off with passage of the Social Security Act in 1935. From the moment it was passed to the moments of today, this has always been a lightning rod of controversy. It's been always a political hot potato that's just debated back and forth. But Social Security was, from its inception, this idea of kind of forcing people to prepare for the fact that someday they would have to retire. And it is a government sponsored program that takes money out of your check, but it also takes money from who you work for. So it's got its income coming in from two streams: the employee and the employer. And so the revenue comes in through your hard work, your labor. You spend years of your life working some job, and when you reach that golden age of 65, the idea is you've paid into this throughout your life, so you can start drawing on your Social Security benefits when you reach that retirement age. Before Social Security, it was just simply understood that you prepared for your retirement yourself. You're the one who saved up. You were responsible for your life. But the reality of it is, and left to their own devices, most human beings are just trying to live day to day. They're just trying to pay bills and raise kids and pay a mortgage and stuff like that. So most people really aren't thinking about a retirement or setting aside for that retirement. And before Social Security, it was understood that kids would help their parents out in that older age. But it's the Depression, and a lot of people are having problems paying their own bills, and they couldn't take care of their parents or the elderly, and they did get left aside. They weren't being, I guess, provided for in very basic ways. So yeah, Social Security is. I would also say this: it's not an entitlement. It's not charity. You worked for it, you put into it, you paid for it. It's yours by right. You added to the system, so it is yours to draw from. But Social Security will probably always be, I don't know, ridiculed, attacked, debated in the federal government. I've also always felt this. Like there were people in the 1920s. I mean, there were people who put money into a savings account. They were thinking about their retirement. There were some Americans out there who are like, yeah, you're right. Okay, I'm responsible for myself. And they put money into a savings account. And, for decades, they were building up for retirement. And then the banks got wiped out, right? The market crash and the banks begin to collapse and the bank runs kick in. So, like, even if you did the right thing, you saved up for your retirement. What does it matter if the banks got wiped out, right? Your savings account is gone, your retirement's gone. So yeah, on so many levels, this is a program that it really historically has worked. But anyways, I'll leave it at that. I'll also say though that Franklin Roosevelt considered this to be the crowning achievement of his presidency. He said that the what Social Security did more than anything is it restored dignity to the elderly and gave them sort of a chance to live out their golden years as they wanted to, without having to beg or grovel, for help in those later years. Okay, the Works Progress Administration, or the WPA. Uh, this program was mainly about. I mean, it did some like infrastructure work, but a big part of the WPA was about trying to give people work who otherwise couldn't find work. Like they had specific skill sets that just weren't being hired. I've always talked about how musicians in America, like imagine being able to play a trumpet or a trombone. You're really good at it. It's your talent. It's your skill. But people aren't hiring musicians in the Depression. It's like in the 1920s, you had no problem finding work. Jazz was all the rage, and you could get on with a jazz band, and there you go. But in the 1930s, with everything down, it's very hard for musicians to find work. So one thing the Works Progress Administration did, and this would have been done on the county level, is they hired people to join what are called these WPA bands, and they would practice their instruments throughout the week. Then on Saturday nights, they would give out like a free concert for the community, so people could come out and just kind of watch the band play, set aside your cares for a little bit, things like that. Those Some of those WPA bands were really good. They went on to just like record albums and stuck together even past the Depression. But yeah, things like that. So musicians were finding work through the Works Progress Administration. Think about like painters, artists, people who would have painted art. There's not a lot of that being sold during the Great Depression. I guess artists are always struggling, right? But the Works Progress Administration paid painters to do things like paint town murals, paint hospitals, maybe paint something nice on the wall of a hospital, and just kind of give back to the community in that sort of a sense. And in paying these musicians and these painters, like they're not eating steak and lobster. They're not living high on the hog. It's like it's enough money to survive and get by. Works Progress Administration also, uh, like from Iceland, they put together these oral history programs, and they paid historians to just go out in their community and like interview people about historical events. Like Works Progress Administration hired historians to go say, hey, go figure out people in your county who served in the Great War. Go sit down in their living room with them, set up your recording device, and just interview them. Talk to them about their experience in the war. So, that's a valuable thing to get those firsthand experiences of what happened in World War One. Go talk to veterans of the Spanish American War. What did they face over there? What did they have to say about their time over in Cuba or whatever it is? So, yeah, oral histories like that. A very valuable thing that the WPA has given to history is what is called the slave narratives. And this is where, yeah, historians sat down with former slaves, set up their recorders, and asked them questions about, what it was to have been a slave. Now, truth be told, these WPA oral histories are done in the 1930s. So this is like 70 years after slavery had ended. So a lot of times those slave narratives are like, hey, I was 5 years old when slavery ended, but my mother always said this, and my father said this, and I had an aunt who told me this. But it was still those stories passed down from generation to generation of, the experience of having been a slave. So the Works Progress Administration really did a lot for the field of history in its time. Now, when a lot of people look back and criticize New Deal programs, this one I think gets a lot of the criticism A lot of people see it as sort of busy work. It's not really necessary. Did we really have to pay someone to play a trumpet, during the Great Depression? But I would say to that, it meant the world to that trumpet player. It meant, being able to pay bills and put food on the table and surviving these darkest of times. So, yeah, the Works Progress Administration is about a lot of things, but it's also about trying to help those people with those specific skill sets who just couldn't find work. Okay, the next point of the National Labor Relations Act. Labor is your key word there. This does a lot to help labor and labor unions in the United States. This is also called the Wagner Act, but I like to call it the National Labor Relations Act. Again, labor is your key word here. What this act does, first off, is it gives labor the right to collective bargaining. And that's something that hadn't been firmly established at that point. This idea that labor has the right to collective bargaining. What that means is labor unions are legal. Workers can come together collectively to bargain for better hours, better wages, benefits, and things like that. So it's a huge push for labor, giving that right to collective bargaining. Out of this has also created this board, the National Labor Relations Board. This board is something that workers can file complaints to. If there are unsafe conditions at your workplace, you can file a complaint with the board. If you feel like you're being unfairly treated at work, you can file a complaint with the board. So it's something whereby the government can look into worker complaints. It plays a role in ending strikes. If a strike reaches an impasse between uh, the business owner and workers, if a strike is taking place and there's no progress being made, the government can have both sides sit down, listen to what they have to say, and then sort of hand down a decision about the strike. So, yeah, the National Labor Relations Act and the board that's created out of it, these are all things that are there to help the American worker, to help labor in the United States. Okay, the National Youth Administration Act. Youth is your keyword there, the NYA. And this is about helping children, the kids of the Depression, through those darkest of days. Youth, again, being a key word. Well, it turns out in the 1930s, in the depths of the Depression, a lot of kids weren't going to school. Their moms and dads held them out of classes and had them doing sort of menial tasks to help bring a little bit of money in for the family. Little kids, instead of going to school, they were picking apples or cotton or doing some type of work like that. And President Roosevelt believed that that was a disservice to those kids, that they weren't getting an education. But he also believed it was a disservice to the country at large itself. We were at that point a modernized, industrialized nation. And he understood for a child to have an opportunity when it grew up in an industrial world, they needed the basics of an education. So the National Youth Administration was set up to help those kids. But also in so many ways, it was there to help the country because, 10, 15, 20 years down the road, you don't want an ignorant, illiterate population sort of running the nation. So the National Youth Administration set up programs where if kids went to school, and that's the big step, you got to be there, you got to be present. But that if kids went to school, then when the school day came to an end, they could get these small jobs that paid just, a little bit of money. Sometimes it was simple as kids sweeping the hallways, cleaning the bathroom, something like that. If a kid was really good at math, they would hire them on as a math tutor for their fellow students. If a kid was good at science, they could be a science tutor, things like that. So one thing the National Youth Administration did is it got kids back into school in that way. Again, I say this about all these New Deal programs. They're not eating steak and lobsters. They're not living high on the hog. It's some money. It's better than picking apples or cotton. Not much better, but a little bit better. So that's an incentive to Ma and Pa to keep Junior in school, right? He gets an education and he's bringing a little money in on the side. But the NYA also did a lot to educate kids about nutrition. eating 3 square meals a day, being physically active and healthy and things like that. And there are some pretty famous people who come out of this NYA program. Um, I remember reading where Richard Nixon was an NYA kid out there in California. Jimmy Carter in Georgia was an NYA kid as well. I've got Lyndon Baines Johnson here on the outline. LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, he got his political start running the NYA in the state of Texas. And that sort of begins his rise within the Democratic Party, his rise within Texas politics. Then he becomes a pretty powerful U.S. Senator along the way from Texas as well. Later goes on to be John F. Kennedy's vice president. And tragically, when Kennedy is assassinated, LBJ becomes president of the United States. So he got his rise start there with the NYA. And I've always said this about the NYA. It gave so many benefits to America going forward. These kids of the Depression who stay in school and go on to graduate from high school, they're going to go fight the war. For a lot of them, their next stop is, either to go to Europe or Asia and fight fascism around the world. Then when the war comes to an end, these children of the 30s who are adults during the war come home, and they're going to use this thing called the GI Bill. And they're going to use the GI Bill to go and get a college education. For a lot of these young men and women, this was the first time, and they're the first member of their families to go to college. And so staying in school in the 30s, in part because of the NYA, getting a high school degree, going off to fight the war, coming home from the war, and going forward and getting a university level education, they become engineers, doctors, lawyers, scientists. They build this country into the powerhouse that it becomes. And like the world that you live in, the America that you live in, they built that America. They built that world. Some people call them the greatest generation. There's actually a book by Tom Brokaw. The title of the book is The Greatest Generation. And it talks about these children of the Depression who grew up in the war, who came home and used the GI Bill to build the country into what it is. And, we do take it for granted. Guilty. I take living in America for granted sometimes too. But, they would have wanted you to take it for granted. They would have wanted you to not know what a depression is like. They would have wanted you to not know what dealing with fascism around the world was like and having to fight world wars on two fronts. So they tried to save future generations of Americans from having to endure the struggles that they went through in their childhood and their early days, like depression and world war and things like that. So yeah, I can't say enough good things about the NYA. It really truly did a lot of positive for that generation of Americans. Okay, looking at the Revenue Act of 1935. So this goes back to Huey Long's complaints of taxing the rich to help pay for these programs. And taxes were raised on wealthy Americans as well as corporations under the Revenue Act of 1935. Roosevelt was concerned about a deficit that was growing, that was getting very large and felt like was getting out of control. And so he's trying to reduce deficit spending by raising taxes on the rich and corporations. But he didn't tax at the levels that Huey Long had been doing back in Louisiana. And it is somewhere here in the 30s and during the New Deal where we just kind of threw our hands up and realized that the deficit was just going to go out of control. And we had to pay for this New Deal, and the deficit rose. Then on December the 7th, 1941, the Japanese hit Pearl Harbor, and we're off to fight World War II. That's a war that had to be won. I'll talk about the war in our next topic. Failure's not an option there. You had to defeat imperialist Japan and Nazi Germany, and you pay that price. It doesn't matter what monetarily. It doesn't matter what that price is. You pay for that war. You fund it, and so the deficit spirals out of control with the spending of World War II. And as World War II was coming to an end, we found ourselves in the middle of a war of ideas. an ideological war that we'll call the Cold War. And we'll spend so much money during the Cold War on military defense, weapon systems, B-52 bombers, intercontinental ballistic missiles, nuclear-powered submarines and aircraft carriers, and the deficit will just truly spiral out of control. Oh, and all the while, we're also trying to win a space race, get a man on the moon before the Russians do, and all that. So yeah, it's here in the 30s where that deficit spiraled out of control, and we just kind of gave up on the idea of trying to bring it down or pay it off. And then later on down the road, we get a war on terror, and the spending just continues to go up, up, up. Well, in 1936, Franklin Roosevelt is reelected in one of the biggest victories in all of American history. Kind of hard to see, but they're on the bottom right-hand side of your slide. 98% of the electoral vote will go to Franklin Roosevelt. I remember when I was a undergraduate student, a professor of mine told me that the country either saw Roosevelt as Satan or Santa Claus. And you can tell by the map there that more Americans saw him as Santa Claus than Satan. So, yeah, Roosevelt's reelected there in 1936. Big, huge win. Again, one of the biggest victories in all of American history, truth be told. But sometimes when presidents win that big by such large margins, it can kind of go to their head. They begin to think that they can do no wrong. And there's been a lot of presidents who are extremely successful in that first term who run into roadblocks and obstacles in the second term. That's going to be the case here with FDR. The example that always has come into my mind is Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson had an amazing first term. He couldn't do any wrong in that first term. But then in that second term, there was so many missteps and stumbles, and Americans weren't thinking highly of Jefferson at the end of that second term. Beloved for that first term. That first term is, that's amazing stuff. That second term, he had a lot of problems, a lot of obstacles. The same thing will happen here with FDR. Most people will look at it and say, a good first term did a lot to try to get the country back up on its feet, but then missteps and problems in that second term. Okay, as I look at these problems in FDR's second term, a lot of these problems are things that he created. It's not true of all these things, but he's sort of the central character in these problems that emerge. Okay, the first thing to look at is the United Auto Worker strike. This is in 1937 in Flint, Michigan, at a General Motors plant. These are guys who make cars for GM. They go on strike. They're members of this labor union, the United Auto Workers, and they go on strike and they want better pay. General Motors, for its part, doesn't want to negotiate with these guys. They don't want to give in to this demand for better pay. But General Motors also felt like, it's really arrogant of these guys. They should be happy they have work. There's a lot of people in the country who would love to have work. So General Motors didn't want to negotiate here. Also I've had students in the past say, well, if General Motors doesn't like this, why not just fire this workforce? And there's all these unemployed people who would be happy to take that job. There's a lot involved with these positions. There's skill work, it's training. It would be a mess for General Motors to have to train an entire new work staff and all that sort of stuff. So General Motors contacts President Roosevelt and says, hey, we consider this to be a national emergency. We want you to send in the military and put these guys back to work. It's dangerous for workers to go on strike. If other people out there in America start to get wind of this, that could lead to other people going on strike. The country economically doesn't need its workforce going on strike right now. So, yeah, General Motors is just trying to get Roosevelt to do its dirty work. And they're trying to get the president to send the army in and, handle this mess. And as we've gone through this semester, we've talked about this quite a bit, right? That, the sort of the MO on these situations is workers go on strike. Businessman, rich guy contacts politician. Politician sends in some type of military force. The strike can be put down rather brutally, and then the strike is over. So Franklin Roosevelt, He tells General Motors that he's not going to do that. He's not going to send in the military to force workers to go back to work. But also, it's sort of a veiled threat. He told General Motors that they needed to negotiate with their workers because if not, they could be hauled before that board, that National Labor Relations Board that we talked about just a few minutes ago. And General Motors felt like the president was threatening to bring them before that board, threatening to end the strike in favor of the workers. So General Motors didn't really care for the feeling of being threatened or the reaction of the president. And at a point, General Motors did sit down and negotiate, and they gave in to some of the demands of the workers. They didn't pay them at quite the rate the workers were wanting. They did get a pay increase. But the problem here for Franklin Roosevelt is that the business world, businessmen in America are starting to take a negative view of him. Businessmen at that point would have said, hey, this president's all about, we got to come together as a country to get through this problem. But every time push comes to shove, he seems to be more pro-labor than he is pro-business. And I don't know, businessmen didn't like this idea that General Motors had been threatened, that the president was threatening to bring them before that board and all that sort of stuff. So that is a problem for Roosevelt, that businessmen start to see him in a different way. This next point of the court packing scheme, in my humble opinion, for whatever it's worth, politically speaking, this is it's probably the dumbest thing that Franklin Roosevelt tried. Look, he's otherwise a very brilliant man, but this was not a good move. But anyway, to this point, we've talked about how the Supreme Court has gone after a few of these New Deal programs, found them to be unconstitutional. I kind of set up that the Democrats controlled the presidency and the Congress, but the Supreme Court at that point was majority Republican appointments. And so, yeah, from time to time, you might remember the Agricultural Adjustment Act. The Supreme Court has stepped in and found things to be unconstitutional. Well, in 1937, there was a lot of talk that Social Security might be coming before the Supreme Court. And there was a real fear for Roosevelt that Social Security was going to get dismantled by the U.S. Supreme Court. So rather than just sit back and watch that possibly unfold, the president got proactive here and makes a very bold move to say that we needed to add 6 justices to the U.S. Supreme Court. And that is a big, bold move to call for the addition of 6 justices to the court. If a president of the United States were even to ask for just one addition to the U.S. Supreme Court, man, that would touch off a firestorm of controversy, and that the debates would just rage in Washington D.C. So asking for just one would set off all kinds of problems, but to ask for 6 is quite a bit. Well, publicly, President Roosevelt said he was asking for this because a lot of the men on the Supreme Court were older, kind of in their 70s. He said they can't handle this workload. I'm trying to help them out, really. I'm just trying to add more judges to the court to help these boys because they can't handle their docket. That's what he said publicly. But the American people in the United States Congress saw right through this for what it was. It is in so many ways executive overreach. This is the executive branch trying to control the judicial branch by adding judges to the Supreme Court. Let's be very honest and very real. If the Congress says yes, Roosevelt gets to pick all 6 of those judges. He's going to pick judges who are sympathetic to the New Deal and his programs. And so this really is the executive branch trying to control the judicial branch by adding those justices to the court. You can see there are little cartoon drawings that we have. That one on the far right in particular, it's showing that he's just a step away from the dictator's chair if he can get that Supreme Court revision that he seeks. Well, in Congress, they said no. Congress said we're not going to allow the executive branch to control the judicial branch. So the court packing scheme did not pass. It did not come to be. In particular, it was Southern Democrats who blocked this from happening. And when you look at it, what you say is in that moment, Southern Democrats are in so many ways breaking with the New Deal. They're breaking with President Roosevelt. And they're starting to really see that this man might be a dictator after all, with his handling of the court packing scheme. Texas Democrats in particular, really led a lot of this charge against this court packing idea. Now, in these moments here in the middle of the Depression, the court packing scheme is a big deal. And I've always tried to tell students, like, it's like if there's a crack in the foundation of the Democratic Party at that moment in time. It's a crack that I believe would have grown even bigger in those moments. But, World War II happened. Everybody put aside political animosity. You wave the flag, you win the war. But you'll see after World War II that crack, the court packing scheme left. It starts to grow over time. So much so that eventually Southern Democrats will start to realize that they don't have a lot in common with Northern Democrats, and they'll start to bolt from the party and go towards the Republican side. So yeah, this court packing scheme, I honestly I feel it is a big deal in American history. It's a big, it plays a big role in determining modern politics in so many ways. So yeah, there's the court packing. And Southerners in particular, I just want to raise that one more point. Yeah, Southerners in particular are really starting to see the president in a very different way in light of the court packing scheme. Okay, economic problems. So in the fall of 1937, some of Roosevelt's economic advisors told him that it looked like the country was headed for recovery. The indicators seemed to be headed in the right direction. It looked like the country really was on the road to recovery, and that's great. That's awesome news in the fall of 37 that it looks like the country is back on the road to recovery. So Roosevelt, who was worried about deficit spending, who was worried sort of about growing the deficit and getting too big, he decided that it was time to start to slowly cut back on government spending on programs and sort of in a sense like get the American workforce away from government spending and back to the private sector, back to jobs. So he started to pull back on funding for programs like the CCC, WPA, and things like that. But what happened is Americans panicked again. People who were in those programs, they realized they weren't making as much money as they used to. They started to panic and just go back to bread and butter and not buying things. And I don't know how you pull this off, but in the middle of a depression, the country suffered a recession there in the fall of 1937. And Roosevelt, recognizing that he had made a mistake, recognizing that he was causing more economic problems than he was good, he did order Congress to pass corrective legislation. Not that the president has a right to do that, but he more or less tells his Democratic colleagues in the Congress to pass corrective legislation, refund those programs. Heck, some of those programs got more funding than they ever had before. And so, yeah, you're just in doing all that, you're causing more deficit spending. You've set the country back economically in several ways. I guess I give him credit for realizing that he had made a mistake and was trying to correct the problem. But yeah, there's more economic hardship for the country as a result of that. Okay, looking at problems with the South. So in his second term, Roosevelt, in a meeting with his advisors, basically asked them, what's holding us back here? We've spent money, we've created work programs. Why are we still in a depression? And the president wanted a basic answer of, what's holding us back from full economic recovery? Well, his advisors, some of them said that really the problem was the South. And they said that the South needed to modernize, that you needed an industrialized South that could create jobs, and that's what would get the country back up on its feet. His advisors told him the South was in so many ways backwards, tied to the soil. They needed to change, they needed to modernize. Okay, fine, you're told that in a cabinet meeting with your advisors. But then Roosevelt was doing a fireside chat, and over the radio, he says to the country that the biggest obstacle to recovery is the South. And in his radio address, he really was talking about the economy and industrialization and things like that. But he said that the South needed to change. The South needed to modernize and it needed to change. What a lot of Southerners heard wasn't like industry and economics. What they heard was Jim Crow and segregation, and that angered a lot of the South. Also, there's just this basic idea that, if you get called out, uh, there's this natural inclination to get angry and to lash out and to be defensive. So that's a problem he need not have created for himself. He could have quietly, behind closed doors, tried to push for industrialization in the South or do things to help get the South back up on its feet. He didn't have to come on the radio and say that, but it just compounds more problems. So yeah, with the court packing scheme, there's a lot of Southerners already upset. Now they're just even more upset when he calls out the South and says it has to change, it has to modernize. Okay, this next point I don't really see as a problem, but it turned out that way. The Fair Labor Standards Act established a minimum wage for workers in the United States. We used to call it the minimum standard before we started calling it the minimum wage. But with the Fair Labor Standards Act, we have a minimum wage finally in American history after decades of that fight. Businessmen in America hated this. They said, we will go, we're ruined. Small businesses are going to fall. They're not going to be able to operate under this system of a minimum wage. And so businessmen who were already upset at him because of his handling of the UAW strike, they're extra special mad now because of the passage of a minimum wage. So even when he's doing something that most would agree is a good, it turns into a negative for Roosevelt in many ways. All right, you put all this together, and by 1938 for sure, there's this huge loss of momentum for the New Deal. Southern politicians are dropping off. They don't want to support it anymore. The spending, all the stuff, they see Roosevelt as a dictator. The country lost its zeal and its enthusiasm for the New Deal along the way. So, yeah, there really is a loss of momentum for the New Deal there in Roosevelt's second term. But also a big problem is the coming of World War II. It was pretty obvious in Roosevelt's second term that things were heating up around the world. The war had already started in Asia at that point in time. Then in 1939, the Germans will invade Poland and plunge the entire world into war. So, when the war broke out in Europe, Franklin Roosevelt talked about American intervention. He said that Hitler was a threat not only to Europe, but to the United States and to the world. And Roosevelt wanted to help. He wanted to, if nothing else, get weapons and supplies to the Allied nations to help in the fight against the Japanese and the Germans. But the majority of the American people disagreed with that assessment. They did not want war. They wanted to be isolated, neutral, stay out of the fight. And, it took getting hit at Pearl Harbor to wake the country up to the realization that we were going to have to be a part of that war. So the coming of the war itself, Roosevelt's feelings of some type of intervention. I'm not saying the guy wanted to send combat forces over there, but somehow, some way help the Allied cause in their fight. That too causes a problem with Roosevelt there in his second term. All right, well, that's it for this topic. Take care.